If you want to be more efficient and effective while experiencing more inner peace, then working on the core of your issues instead of putting on a Band-Aid is vital. Welcome to Life Picks University podcast. I'm your host, Esty Rapport, and here to help you improve your 28 cognitive functions, the 28 things that make up thinking. In each episode, we'll discuss a real-life challenge, why you might be struggling with it, and give you practical strategies so all areas of your life will improve. With 28 cognitive functions, we always have a few of them to improve. But does it make a difference which ones you work on first? That's what's coming up next on the Life Picks University podcast, episode 376. But first, take a screenshot of this episode, a selfie of this episode of where you're listening to it, and share it on IG stories. Don't forget to tag me at Life Picks University so that way I could reshare it and give you a shout out on Instagram. Now, for today's real life challenge, imagine you have just taken the cognitive function assessment, which, by the way, if you want to take, you could take at lifepicksuniversity.com/CF. So that's LifePicks, P-I-X, university.com/CF. So imagine you have just taken the assessment. It takes just about 10 minutes to do, and right away you know which one of your cognitive functions are weaker and which ones are stronger. You've taken the cognitive function assessment. You know which ones are weaker and which ones are stronger, but you're wondering which ones to work on first. This real life challenge is related to all 28 cognitive functions, and it could really depend which one of the cognitive functions you need to work on. So rather than talking about specific cognitive functions, what we're going to talk about is the 3 phases of thinking. You see, thinking is made up of 3 phases. This is how we take information, process it, and tell the world we know. Like the process of thinking. We start off by input, where we take in the information. Then phase 2 is the elaboration, where we process it, all the thinking things. And then third phase is output, where we tell the world we know what we know. Now, even though there's phase 1, 2, and 3, these are fluid. We could go back, we jump around, we go around depending on the task that we're doing. We took some information, we thought we know the answer, we didn't get enough, we have to go back and get more information. We have to think about it, right? We're jumping around back and forth. But under each one of these phases of thinking, there are some of the cognitive functions, some of the thinking skills. So in input, in the first phase, there are 8 cognitive functions. In elaboration, there are 12 cognitive functions, and in output, there's another 8 cognitive functions. So if you have a few cognitive functions that you want to work on, usually the best way to work on them, to improve them, is to start by making sure all the ones in your input phase is strong. So on the cognitive function assessment, the first 8, you want to make sure those first 8, the first 8 in the input phase, are really strong. Then once those are strong, you'll want to move into the elaboration phase, the next 12. You want to make sure the next 12 are strong. And if those are really strong, you'll want to work on to the output phase and make sure those are really strong. Because when you have the right information, it's easier to think about it. And once it's easier to think about it, it's easier for you to tell the world you know what you know. Make sense? I'll give you an example. If you struggle with clear perception, which is in the input phase, and defining the problem, which is in the elaboration phase, and you start working on defining the problem first, it's going to be a lot harder for you, because while you're trying to improve your cognitive function, while you're trying to improve your ability to define the problem better, you still have a different skill that is not very strong. That is the skill of clear perception, of taking in information in a clear and organized way, is not really strong. So while you're trying to define the problem, you don't really have the information that you need in a clear and organized manner to define the problem. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, so we got our baseline. There are 3 phases of thinking, and you want to make sure that you're working in those 3 phases. But what happens if within the first phase, within the first 8, you have quite a few that you need to work on, which is most probably what it is? Does it make a difference which cognitive function you work on first? Well, here's the truth. There are some cognitive functions that when you work on those first, even when you work in those phases, in the input phase, in the elaboration phase, within the phases, that when you work on those first, it helps you with others. But here's where it gets sticky. because not always, it will really depend on the mixture of what other cognitive functions you have strong and you have weak. So for the most part, whenever I work with my clients, I always tell them, leverage your stronger cognitive functions to help you improve your weaker ones. Within the phases, see what you could do with your stronger ones to help you with your weaker ones. So that way, while you're improving them, you're using the ones that will be easiest for you to improve, because that way you get momentum, that way you get leverage, and that way you could even use those cognitive functions to help you with the next one. Does that make sense? There are a few exceptions that come in the elaboration and output phase. That is comparing, projecting virtual relationships, and understanding reality. So once the input phase, taking all the information in is super clear, then what I would suggest you to do is make sure comparing, projecting virtual relationships, and understanding reality are strong, because those are the foundations for many of the other cognitive functions. You're not going to be able to do other ones if these are weak. So even if these are harder for you, work on those first. And then with that all in mind, make sure to leverage your strong ones to help you improve your weaker ones. But if any of this is overwhelming for you, that is the most important factor to remember. You want to be able to make it as easy as possible for you to improve your cognitive functions. So see how you can take your stronger cognitive functions to help you improve your weaker ones. Now, remember, we can always improve all our cognitive functions even more. We've got to make a personal decision if we want to work more on one cognitive function before we move on, or we decide it's enough for now and we'll come back to improving this cognitive function later. There's no right or wrong. It's based on what works for you, for your brain, and your current situation. Today, we spoke about what order to improve your cognitive functions in. There are no set rules about this. The general concept is to work in order of the phases. First, all the cognitive functions in the input phase, then all the cognitive functions in the elaboration phase, and then all the cognitive functions in the output phase. And then within the phases, leverage the ones that you're good at. That goes without saying. If you are good at some of them from other phases, bring it into the phase that you're doing now, so that way will help you even faster. Your challenge today is to figure out which cognitive function you should work on first. If you haven't yet taken the assessment, start by doing that at lifepicksuniversity.com/CF for cognitive functions. So it's lifepicks, PIX, university.com/CF. Figure out which ones are stronger, which ones are weaker, and then follow the phases and leverage your strengths to improve your weaker ones. And guess what? If you're stuck, you could always hit me up on Instagram at LifePicks University, and I'll be super happy to help you. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you next week.
That's all for this episode of the LifePicks University podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can gain from it, and you'll be helping us reach our goal of 1 million downloads by the end of 2025. Have an awesome rest of your day and grow those dendrites.